Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions and I do my best to provide a biblical, theological answer. Hey, the question that we've got this time around is a question which is very topical at the moment. This is your question. This is what it says. I know you have shared some thoughts on this previously, but now it's happened. What are your thoughts about the repeal of Roe versus Wade going forward? And you're right, when this was first leaked, the potential decision was first leaked from the Supreme Court. Was it 2 months ago, back in May? I don't know. Whenever it was, a question was asked and I responded, and I can't remember what the question was and I can't remember what I said. But you can have a look on the YouTube channel there. Just have a look amongst the videos under the Q&A playlist and you will find it. So, but I wanted to just take a moment because I think there's a couple of things which I think we should think about. Number one is this: regardless of what side of the debate you find yourself, listening to people talk, I think something has been either overlooked or was never fully grasped. And it's simply this, that the overturning of the decision has not overturned abortion law in terms of its legality. The decision, Roe versus Wade in 1973, what it did was, in America, it made abortion legal nationwide. It became a federal issue that the states no longer had the right to determine where the boundaries were, whether they could have them at up to what term or anything like that. The federal courts determined that. And what the overthrowing or the repealing of that decision has done has not made abortions illegal. What it's done is simply give the jurisdiction back to the states to determine for themselves whether abortions will be performed and under what conditions and where the boundaries are. And so I just think we just need to be mindful of that. Now, I get that that's going to create some inconsistencies from state to state, but I think that's the nature of American politics anyhow. I get that it's going to cause some concern or some anxiety for some people. For example, they are in a conservative state and who determines that you can only have an abortion, for example, up to a certain number of weeks, and you may want a late-term abortion, and now you feel that, what do I do? And you've got to travel out of state, whatever happens. I don't know how it works. I get all those sorts of things, but in the midst of that, let's not forget that it hasn't in itself overthrown abortion law and made them illegal. It said that the jurisdiction is returning back to the states, each state to determine for itself. So I just throw that out there. Now, your question is, what are my thoughts about it going forward? It's a good question. Well, I think for me, it highlights something which I think is needs to be surfaced in some ways. And that is the way that when I look at the emotion that's being expressed by those who have been pro abortion and who are now getting quite aggressive and quite vocal in their outrage. They're the same people who were complaining and criticizing a group of people who are protesting other decisions. And I think the fact that we're seeing this play out, that suddenly a group of people who said, no, you can't do this, this is inappropriate, and now something's happened that they disagree with, they are doing the same sorts of things, highlights something which is really fundamental, and that is the way that Western society, at any rate, has become increasingly rights-based. So we've placed self at the center and said, so long as I don't offend against any laws, and so long as I don't hurt anybody, it's my human right to live my life my way on my terms. So if I want an abortion, I can have one. If I want to express my sexuality this way, I'm free to. If someone else wants to express it another way, they're free to, because it's about human rights. It's about the right to live my life without state interference within the laws of the government. And the fact that people are pushing back against the Roe versus Wade decision brings that into relief, because it raises a question. What is it that they're pushing back against? And I think it's this, that people have always considered human rights to be universal and inalienable. That comes from the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights back in the late 1940s, 47, 48, sometime around there, where it sets out the framework for basic or fundamental human rights. And it says that they are universal, i.e. that they're given to everybody, irrespective of race, of creed, of education, of socioeconomic status. They apply to everybody. And that they are inalienable in the sense that they can't be removed, except, for example, a government can suspend a person's, for example, right to freedom and imprison them if they break a law. But the fact that people now finding what they thought was a right that was created in 1973 has been taken away highlights something. Where do our human rights come from? Like, who decides what is a right and what is not? And the reason I say that is that for a generation has grown up thinking that this was a universal human right that the Supreme Court established. But the Supreme Court established it. If a court decides, if a government decides that this is a right, then why do we get upset when it's removed? Because governments give, governments go. If the UN, if appointed officials determine rights, then they're not universal by definition, in my view, because they have been given to us by a group of people. They have determined what's right, what's wrong. They've determined what it means. And therefore, as human nature changes, as people's ideals change, as their philosophy about life and outlook changes, then inevitably they are going to change what they believe is as fundamental, as basic, and as a human right. So for me, when it comes to human rights, where do they come from and what makes them universal and what makes them inalienable? I think you've got to go to the roots of Western society. It has its roots in Christianity, which means that, the Bible was the book that gave us an understanding of what it meant to be in a decent society and everything else. And when you look at the Bible, because if a right doesn't come from outside of ourselves, it's not universal. It's an assigned right. It's been given by a government, by an agency. And as I say, if they give, they can take away. For a right to be universal and inalienable, it has to come from an external source that cannot that we cannot alter, so to speak. And so that's why I think if we go back to the foundations of Western society, has its roots in Christianity. We see in the Bible that the human rights that God gives are around freedom. Well, not even that. It gives a human right around dignity, around equality, around the right for food, for basic shelter, all those sorts of things. We see how the Bible speaks into those, but it never speaks into as a right sexual autonomy in terms of, or the ability to express myself how I choose, to have an abortion when I want, or anything like that. So they're not universal. So that as the government gives, the government can take away. I say that simply because you've asked the question, what are my thoughts about going forward? My thoughts are, I hope that this starts conversations around what are human rights? Where do they come from? And how do we live out of them? Because simply to say, I have the right to live my life my way, so long as it doesn't affect anybody else, so long as it doesn't impinge upon them directly and it's not illegal, I think is to miss the point, because that's not universal. It's not inalienable. And there's no security, there's no sense of identity. And I don't think you can build a decent society on that, because all that's going to happen is one group of people are going to be fighting for what they perceive as a right over another group of people who are going to be fighting for what they perceive as a right. And we're going to just have this perpetual struggle because it's rights-based. And I think we've got to come up with a better basis for determining what makes a decent and just society. For me, I want to return to to the scriptures, and the values that established so much of what we take for granted today. And I want to say, why don't we recover some of those things around decency and around justice and around mercy and those sorts of things. So those are my thoughts. Don't know if they're helpful or not, but there you go. Hey, as always, you can ask your questions on slido.com. Use the hashtag ALC22. But that's it for now. Until next time, God bless.